everyone, this is John. Welcome back to another episode of our weekly show, The Subcontinent. Our program covers the entire political, economic and social infrastructure of a region which holds almost 25% of the global population. We will try to explain these issues, break down controversies surrounding them, and try to have some external perspectives from experts and people.
In this edition of The Subcontinent, we will talk about how Pakistan is enduring the pressure to normalize relations with Israel.
Following a US-backed deal for Arab-Israeli normalization, Washington and its allies are stepping up their efforts to force more and more countries to establish relations with the Israeli regime. Recent media reports suggest that the pressure is getting higher on Pakistan as two of its important trade partners, namely the Saudi Arabian Kingdom and the UAE, are exhausting their options to push Islamabad towards relations with Israel.
Pakistan is purportedly under pressure by the UAE and Saudi Arabia to normalize relations with Israel. The authorities in the country, however, say Islamabad never recognizes Israel until the Palestinian issue is resolved.
हमारा तो मौक़िफ़ बड़ा क्लियर है और हमारा मौक़िफ़ कायद-ए-आज़म मोहम्मद अली जिन्ना ने 1947 में क्लियर कर दिया था, 1948 में, कि हम इसराइल को कभी तस्लीम नहीं कर सकते जब तक फ़लस्तीनों को उनका हक़ नहीं मिलता, उनको एक जस्ट सेटलमेंट नहीं होती, जो टू नेशन थियोरी थी पैलेस्टीनियन की, कि उनको पूरा एक उनकी स्टेट मिले जो कि पैलेस्टीनियन फैसला करें, ठीक है.
Pakistan says it has made it clear to the UAE that Islamabad cannot recognize Israel until the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is resolved, with Foreign Minister Shah Mahmoud Qureshi saying that Pakistan will not and cannot establish a relationship with Israel until a concrete and permanent solution to the Palestine issue is found.
Pakistan कहीं इजराइल को तस्लीम करने तो नहीं जा रहा.
Qureshi rebuffed reports that Pakistan is under pressure, adding that Prime Minister Imran Khan had time and again clarified there is no pressure on us in this regard. However, Khan revealed last month that Pakistan, like Sudan, was being pressed by some friendly nations to recognize Israel.
लेकिन दबाव है आप पे. ये दबाव आप पे गैर मुस्लिम ममालिक डाल रहे हैं या मुस्लिम ब्रदर ममालिक भी कह रहे हैं कि करो. मैं नाम नहीं ले रहा.
छोड़ें इसको, आगे चलें, इसको रहने दें.
लेकिन सर जो लोग तस्लीम कर रहे हैं उनके इस अमल से खुश हैं आप?
कई हम चीज़ें इसलिए नहीं कह सकते कि हमारे उनसे ताल्लुकात अच्छे हैं, हम उनको अपसेट नहीं करना चाहते, और इंशाल्लाह हमारे मुल्क को अपने पैर पे खड़ा होने दें, फिर आप मेरे से ऐसे सवाल पूछें.
Many believe the Pakistani leader was referring to Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Khan insisted that Islamabad will not open up relations with the Zionists.
हमारे लिए तो, मेरे लिए तो कभी ये सोच में दूसरी सोच आई नहीं कि हम इजराइल को इसलिए तस्लीम नहीं कर सकते.
Khan told local media that Israel's deep influence in the US was behind the pressure, noting that this influence was in fact extraordinary during the Trump stint.
The UAE, Bahrain and Morocco recently established diplomatic and economic relations with the Israeli regime. And last month, Sudan became the latest Arab or Islamic country to follow suit after heavy pressure from Abu Dhabi and Washington. Now there are reports that suggest some other countries in the region, including Saudi Arabia, are also weighing the options to normalize ties. Following the normalization decision of earlier countries, there were protests all around the world as people felt betrayed by these countries claiming themselves to be the leaders of the Muslim Ummah.
Pakistan's economy is heavily dependent on the Persian Gulf countries, and the United Arab Emirates is the country's second largest source of foreign remittance. In the last 5 years, 1.3 million Pakistanis have found jobs in the Arab country. In 2019 alone, Pakistani expatriates in UAE sent more than $5 billion back home. Now imagine the pressure when the UAE stopped issuing new visas for Pakistanis, along with the citizens of several other mostly Muslim countries. Abu Dhabi says the restrictions are due to the coronavirus pandemic, but India has more COVID-19 cases per capita than Pakistan, but no ban was imposed on visas for Indian nationals. Before the visa ban, Pakistanis sent a monthly average of $500 million back home from UAE. At this rate, Pakistan could have received foreign remittance of over $6 billion from UAE in fiscal year 2020 to 2021. Therefore, the UAE move, which is believed to be orchestrated by Saudi Arabia, would dry up this huge source of financial support. These figures are significant for the country's economy because the total foreign exchange reserves of the country stand at about $20 billion.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are joined by Mr. Syed Muaz Shah, who's the Director for Center for Human Rights at Ziauddin University in Karachi, Pakistan. Mr. Shah, thank you so much for coming back to our show. So I'll start off by asking who or what is pressurizing Pakistan towards relations with Israel? How and why?
Interestingly, though there may be many interest groups, there is a sense of a narrative driver that's pushing this towards an end. We know of Trump and his son-in-law Jared Kushner, who've gone on a rapid, aggressive campaign in the Middle East of recent to recognize the state of Israel. I do feel that economics plays a huge role in pressuring these countries who have recognized Israel and who are being pressured to do so. This is one of the pressing points. But the purpose is very clear. The purpose is clear, is to legitimize the state of Israel. And, it's not only the legitimization of the state of Israel, but the legitimization of the occupied lands that have gone on over the years since 1967. We know the wall and the additional Jewish settlements. And, it only begs to question is that if someone recognizes Israel today, are they recognizing their occupation in those lands? And so these are questions that I think, that Israel, obviously their tactic is to isolate the Palestinians. That is the purpose. And they're using economics, particularly in this dire economic situation across the world.
Okay, so US is trying to take the advantage of economic vulnerabilities in countries. Will the economic or political pressure break Islamabad's resistance against the normalization of ties with Israel?
Honestly, I don't think it'll come to that. I am being optimistic, but I think that's fairly provided by proof, because the Pakistani public are known to have a strong Islamic inclination. And there have been independent research polls that have continuously indicated this, that Pakistan has a strong Islamic sentiment. Al-Quds being the third most holiest site for a typical Pakistani cannot be compromised for some economic benefit. So, and it would be political suicide for any political leader or political party to even indicate that they have some sort of policy or even some sort of legitimization for the state of Israel. So when you look at the different political groupings, you have the nationalists, you have the Islamists, and you have the secular group. You have the nationalists and the Islamist groups that are very much against it, which is majority of the country. It's only a minority within the secular group. You have some elements who are teasing this issue through social media and other channels. And I think what's quite interesting is that a lot of uneducated youth sometimes pick up this on social media and ask these questions, that why shouldn't we recognize the state of Israel? And I think one of the main reasons is the lack of education about what's happened to the Palestinian people since 1948. And because they're Generation X and they're removed from these events, there's been a sense of lack of knowledge in respect to what that is. But not only that, a few days ago in Pakistan, we had the anniversary of a famous UN resolution in January 5th, 1949, that recognized the self-determination rights of the Kashmiri people. And Pakistan, particularly Prime Minister Imran Khan, has fielded this, in a very reasonable manner, that any compromise with Israel would actually weaken the cause for the Kashmiris, as that is a legitimate cause as well. So we find that this is something that that cannot be compromised, or the Kashmiri cause will also be hurt. And there is that position as well that is an added reasoning on top of that. And recently, Imran Khan also quoted Quaid-e-Azam, who is a very cross figure that a lot of different groups acknowledge as the founding father of Pakistan and highly respect. He made the position very clear that whatever any country does, our position is very clear, that until Israel accepts the Palestinians and provides them with their rights, there is no just settlement, there can be no recognition for the state of Israel. And that, I think, is the final position of the Pakistani political establishment for the most part, and also the Pakistani public.
Thank you so much, Mr. Shah, for bringing that point. Let's see how people have reacted on social media and cyberspace.
This tweet is about the reaction of the government and the people of Pakistan disapproving the recent normalization of ties between some Arab states and Israel. Citing remarks by Israeli Minister of Regional Cooperation Ophir Akunis that Pakistan is not one of the countries that will establish normal relations with Israel in the near future, Nasreddin Kian praised Pakistani officials. Adam Weinstein points out that one of the reasons that the normalization of Pakistan-Israel relations is not formed is the existence of democracy in Pakistan despite its imperfections. Also, the author notes that if the Pakistanis recognize Israel as a state, then they should also reconsider the Kashmir issue. In that case, the Pakistanis lose the moral standings. Mentioning some reasons such as Pakistan's opposition to Israel's inclusion into the UN and also the Constituent Assembly's resolution to not recognize Israel, Ghazi Naqvi believes that Pakistan will not recognize the Israeli regime as a state.
Cash-strapped Pakistan relies heavily on Saudi Arabia and the UAE to stave off a debt crisis that is always on the horizon as foreign reserves dwindle and the economy contracts. The situation is especially bad right now as Saudi Arabia has asked Pakistan to return the loan. To decrease their leverage on the politics of the country, the Pakistani government has recently asked China for money to return a $1 billion loan to the Saudis.
Late in December, Pakistan reached out to China to return $1 billion to Saudi Arabia as a second installment of a $3 billion soft loan. Islamabad asked Beijing for the commercial loan to help it offset pressure to repay another $1 billion to Riyadh for the next installment. Analysts say it is unusual for Riyadh to press for the return of money as Riyadh had historically never asked Pakistan to repay its loans. Saudi Arabia started pushing Pakistan to repay the loan ostensibly after Islamabad sought Riyadh's support over alleged human rights violations by India in the disputed territory of Kashmir. Saudi Arabia gave Pakistan a $3 billion loan and a $3.2 billion oil credit facility in late 2018. With the $1 billion flowing out, Pakistan, which has $13.3 billion in central bank foreign reserves, could face a balance of payments issue after clearing the next Saudi installment. China has come to our rescue, a Pakistani foreign ministry official told Reuters. China bailed out Pakistan by enhancing the size of a bilateral currency swap agreement by 10 billion yuan or about $1.5 billion. Islamabad has been using the facility since 2011 to repay foreign debt and keep its foreign currency reserves at manageable levels.
Measures by Saudi Arabia and UAE have worsened the situation for Pakistan that was already in a precarious economic condition due to the suspension of its bailout program by the International Monetary Fund, as well as the damage caused by the coronavirus pandemic. However, Saudi Arabia and UAE did not seem content with their plans to choke Pakistan economically and resorted to the other methods which exerted more pressure on Pakistan.
The United Arab Emirates is a country mainly run and populated by expatriates, and Pakistanis are nearly 1/3 of the population, second only to Indians. Nevertheless, Emirates has a long history of human rights violations and discriminations against the expats, particularly Pakistanis. The UAE has been consistently under the criticism for its vague laws, oversized police powers, forced disappearance and detention without charge against ordinary citizens and expats. However, the systematic targeting of Shia Muslims in the country has especially increased after the deal with Israel. Since Abu Dhabi normalized ties with the Israeli regime, the internet is increasingly rife with stories of forced disappearances blamed on the government. Many people have been detained by the state without any proper legal procedure, while nobody knows about their whereabouts. The victims are out of the protection of law because the authorities deny they are being held.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's talk to Ms. Narjis Zehra Habib, whose father Mohammed Habib is one of those Pakistani nationals who went missing in the UAE back in October last year. Ms. Habib, welcome to the program. Please tell us about the case of your father and whatever information you have so far about what happened to him.
My dad's name is Mohammed Habib. He has been working in the UAE, in Dubai specifically, for the past 40 years in the foreign exchange industry. On October 21st, 2020, in midday, four men in civil dress came in his office and they first closed the security cameras, and then they took his mobile phones, and then they asked him to accompany him to the van, which was some distance away. Since then, we have not heard or seen our father. It's been almost 80 days. My aunts are actually Arab nationals. They got married into Arabs. So they have been trying really hard. They've been going to different departments, different police stations, just in order to file the FIR. Initially, for a good month, they refused to even do that. After a month, after my aunts continuously trying to get any official work through, they did lodge an FIR, but then nothing has been followed up since from their end since. They always say that, oh, you have to wait for the call, but then that never comes. We were hoping that we'd hear back soon after the New Year, since that's such a hyped up time in the UAE, but then nothing so far either.
Ms. Zehra, I'm very sorry, and indeed that is very sad and extremely disappointing. So have you been given any information whatsoever on whether there are any charges against him or about his whereabouts?
So it's been almost 80 days and we haven't heard back at all. We haven't heard from him. We haven't seen him since. At this point, we're so frustrated that what we want is that if there is even a tiniest thing or the most insignificant thing that they have against my father, they should rather communicate at this point than just keeping him over there. And if not, then it's an extreme form of human rights violation, which by the way, we have contacted multiple really big names of human rights organizations. We've been in contact with Amnesty, with HRF, with Human Rights Watch. All they've done so far is just take up the story, and then there's been no follow-up from their end either. So at this point, our entire family, our entire community is frustrated with the international organization as well as the UAE government, that it's such a huge thing. There have been multiple people missing for the past almost 3 months, and no contact, no update, no whereabouts about their health, about where they are, have been communicated to their families. We don't know when will they get back to us, to the families.
Viewers, let's just take a quick look at how the global media has covered this issue.
It's been 3 weeks since Hussein, a resident of the UAE for the past 40 years, was arrested in his Deira workplace without any explanations or warrants provided. Hussein's peculiar arrest is not surprising, as a crackdown targeting Pakistani immigrants, a majority of them Shia Muslims, is currently going on in the UAE. Ever since the UAE secured the normalization deal with Israel back in September, the crackdown on the members of the diaspora community has been aggravating. UAE begins subjecting Pakistani Shia Muslims to enforced disappearance in what appeared to punish Pakistani nation for opposing normalizing relations with Israel. First, United Arab Emirates victimized Pakistani Shia Muslim expatriates in the UAE. Now, the Sheikhdom has also begun targeting non-Shia Pakistani expatriates.
For more analysis on this, we are joined by Mr. Musharraf Hussaini, who's a political analyst. Mr. Hussaini, welcome to the show. So, how do you relate the UAE-Israel normalization with the systematic targeting of Pakistanis in the country?
I don't accept it as a normalization. This is like submission to Israel. With Israel keep on doing whatever they have been doing for years against the Palestinians and the cause of the Palestinians, and brush aside everything and just say that we accept Israel. Accepting Israel in this normalization in the present situation means we accept Israel with all its atrocities against what it is doing and it has been doing against the Muslim population and the Palestinians and otherwise for centuries, from Sabra, Shatila onward towards what has been happening in Gaza, in West Bank and otherwise, and whatever the atrocities they have been committing, and with children in jails, with the women in jail, against the people born in the camps in the Palestinian population, and they've grown up in the camps and they got old in the camps. We are accepting everything as a normal life for them, and we are signing on that Israel, whatever it is doing, we accept them like that. So it is not a normalization. So the Arab countries thought that if they submit to Israel and they normalize their relationship with Israel, they accept Israel, and the Pakistan don't, so it will be a big problem for them, and there might be a backlash in other Muslim countries too. So they wanted to pressurize Pakistan to submit to their will and accept Israel also. So it was a tactic from them to emotionally blackmail the Pakistan government and to put that population into trouble. And what they did, what I got the report that some families were taken away, and they didn't know about the families didn't know about the people who were taken away, about their whereabouts. And some people who were given visa to enter and for the jobs in Emirates, when they arrived at the airport, they were picked up and they were taken away straight away. They were taken into the custody. I can't understand that when you have given them the visa and they have arrived there, and not only those people who arrived there, they were taken away and they were taken to unknown places. But the people who have come to the airport to receive them, when they contacted the authorities to find about the whereabouts, they were also taken into custody, and their whereabouts were not known. And later on, there were some families and their women also, and the families who were taken away. It was like an indirect pressure for that problem, so that to convey to the Pakistan government that if you don't accept our demand, the only thing that we are going to do is send your labor population, and we create problem from them. And these people who have been sending the foreign exchange to our country, which is very much required in this present juncture, when the PTI government, the Prime Minister Imran Khan, is striving and struggling to bring Pakistani government out of the situation, the economic troubles, and it's on the brink of bringing them out. So an additional trouble from the United Arab Emirates can pressurize the Pakistani government, but a Pakistani government has decided that it will take no pressures. It will make the rightful decision what they have to take, and they will stand by the Muslim population of the Palestine, and they will not let the Palestinian population being betrayed by the big countries and the wealthy countries of the Muslim world.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that was our episode about Pakistan and the possibility of normalization of relations between Pakistan and the Israeli regime. To watch bits of our episodes and more updates, follow us on our social media platforms. And please make sure to give us feedback about what you think. We'll meet the same time, same day next week. Thanks for watching.